Well, I have a couple of old friends who surprised me and showed up today. I won't say who they are, but they're sitting right over here. And I mean old in the literal sense. I didn't just mean, anyway. Well, before I get started on my talk, I want to tell you I'm not going to be here next Sunday, and I want to explain why. Oh, boy. What do you get, Gregory? It's a long story, but I am not really feel comfortable giving a bunch of details. One of my nieces that Jan and I and our family are particularly close to, her son is 24 years old and is in federal prison in Marion, Illinois. And he's been there about 3 years. And Jan and I have been sending my niece $200 a month for the past several years to help her to be able to afford the 10-hour drive, stay in a hotel, come back every other weekend or every third weekend she goes up. But next weekend, Jan and I, we've been wanting to do this for a while, but we're going to go up with her to visit her son at the federal prison in Marion, Illinois. However, Jamie will be here next Sunday to lead the music, and Phil will do a talk on Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Now, some of you have mentioned to me that while you enjoy hearing Phil talk, that his talks tend to be longer than mine. So I've spoken to him about that. He claims that it's because my talks are shallow and his are deep and full of wisdom. I said, we're not looking for deep and full of wisdom around here. I said, the church has been conditioned to how I do it, therefore it makes the way I do it right. So from now on, he's going to do it my way. Anyway, when it comes to verses from the Bible, I think one of the most common mistakes people make is taking a verse out of context. Matthew 7:1 is one of the most common. You hear people who aren't even believers at all say, do not judge. You know, don't judge. And Jesus said, don't judge or you will not be judged. But a lot of times you hear people say, judge not, in order to rationalize or justify just about anything you can think of under the sun. And the practice of taking one verse out of the Bible and using it in a way that was never its original meaning is so prevalent, someone even came up with a mime about it. Here are a few sports examples of, I think, maybe when this is happening a little bit. I doubt seriously that God had football in mind when it came to this verse. I think Christian schools do this because they know Bible verses, And so, but I don't think they have victory every time. And then is God to blame if you lose, if God gets the credit during the victory, all that? And then today's verse, we see in here athletes use this one all the time. Now, my son Michael here in the front row likes to say that our world has been greatly influenced in our lifetimes by three spiritual giants. Billy Graham, Mother Teresa, and, of course, Tim Tebow. And you may remember that Tim Tebow often used the black eye thing, eye black, I guess it's called, for Philippians 4:13. And he said his ability, his determination, his will to win came from this verse. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Now, the fact that he's 6'3", 240 pounds had nothing to do with it. And if I had decided to lean on the strength of Christ at 5'9" and 140 pounds, I could have done the same thing. I just didn't lean on the strength of Christ like he did. So call me a doubter or a skeptic, but I'm not sure that's exactly what Paul had in mind when under the inspiration of God, when he said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But today, as we continue our series, I'm going to speak on this very familiar but sometimes misused verse, Philippians 4:13. And hopefully we can look at it a little more in context to get a better understanding of its original meaning and then go from there. The context is basically about contentment and generosity. The church in Philippi, you can check out the handy map I think we have here. That's where it is. Had been sending money to Paul to support his ministry, kind of like we have with Gregory and his ministry down there. And Paul talks here in this passage about how much it means to him and how he couldn't do what God had called him to do were it not for their partnership and their help. Now, of course, there also were times where funds were low for Paul. And we all know the stress and anxiety that comes when funds are low. We've all been there maybe many, many times, and we all know the stress, the feeling that you get. And that's what leads to Paul writing the famous words, I can do all things. That is, whether I have a lot, whether I have a little, through lean times, through tough times, through adversity, I can do all things because of the strength I gain from my walk with Christ. Now, could this then be applied to sports or football or business or setting and achieving personal goals? Yeah, there is definitely a transcendent principle here. If you have Christ in your life, He can and will give you enough strength to face and get through any and everything that you ever go through. But how does this actually work? I mean, when bad things happen to you, you hear the C word when you go to the doctor, and you find out, I have cancer. Whatever form of it is, I mean, that puts the fear of God in you. Maybe you've been victimized at some time in your life in some really terrible way, and you're still trying to maybe recover from it. And you say, how can how can I find strength in Christ according to this verse? Maybe you have to go at home or work and deal with difficult people every day. Maybe fear fills your heart when you think about certain things. You come across then, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We're going, how does that work? And for most of us, I think there's kind of a subconscious disconnect. We think, yeah, people like Paul, he was strong enough to say that. Maybe he had some extra gear, like we have 3 gears and he has like 5. He goes to that extra gear when he needs to, or some higher level of spiritual power in his life, where he could say, no challenge, no difficulty, no problem is too much for me. Because I can face, I can overcome all things through Christ. Because while most of us believe that, in theory, to feel that and to actually live that out in reality is another thing. So how could we get to the point where we, regular people, you and me, where we could say, in all honesty, an absolute conviction, the same is true for me. There is no difficulty, no problem, no challenge that is too much for me because I can face, I can overcome all things through Christ. We would all like to say that. We would like to say it and really believe it, but most of us probably aren't there quite yet. Well, first let me mention just a couple of things that this verse doesn't mean. If you're old enough, you remember that story called The Little Engine That Could. It was about a small, undersized train that pulls its oversized load to the top of the mountain, finding strength to keep going by repeating the words, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. And because it was thinking these positive thoughts, it gave it the strength to accomplish the impossible. Was that kind of the same concept behind this verse? When something bad happens, you just say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And maybe click your heels 3 times and close your eyes and something happened. And what does all things really mean? If I said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, I still couldn't lift 1,000 pounds. If I jumped off the top of the stadium over there, it would still break some bones, maybe worse. I can't walk on water like Jesus did. I mean, can we be healed from a fatal disease? Can we break a lifelong addiction or vice? Can we achieve any and every goal that we set for ourselves? Humanism says whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. It's also put this way, if it is to be, it is up to me. So is this Philippians 4:13 just the Bible's version of the power of positive thinking? What about if you go to hear a Christian business person or a Christian athlete, and in their story, they account for their success by quoting this verse. I did it, but only through Christ that strengthened me. Well, what about the struggling businesswoman or man in the audience who's not doing so well financially? I mean, isn't the strength of Christ good for them? Or the other Christian athletes who maybe aren't quite as talented or gifted, but worked really hard. They prayed, they asked God for strength. Where was the strength of God for them? The fact is, this verse and the words of this verse are not a magic formula. Like abracadabra. You say the magic words and anything is possible. God will always come through just the way you want. So today we're going to try to explore what does this verse actually mean, because there's still power in here It is still true. But before we go any further, I want to stop for just a moment and ask you to reflect and think about what right now is the biggest challenge or problem or adversity or stress in your life right now. Because later I want to talk about how we can apply what we talk about to your particular situation. So take just a moment right now and identify in a word or two the number one challenge, the number one issue, the number one fear, however you want to say it, the biggest negative in my life right now is blank. Identify that in your mind for just a moment. Keep that word in mind as we talk. All right, you got it? Now, you see the word strengthens Paul uses in this verse, and it comes from the Greek language. The New Testament was written in Greek, and it's the word endunamo. And we know the prefix in means to put something inside something, and dunamo is where we get our word dynamite. So it means to infuse dynamite into something, to infuse power into something, or in this case, into someone. What Paul is saying is, I can do all things because Jesus Christ has infused his dynamic power in me. It is not my power and strength that enables me to face and overcome any and all issues, problems, challenges. It's God's power in me. You might look at it this way. Probably all of us here would affirm that God is omnipotent. That the word means all-powerful, right? You believe that God has all power, the ability to do anything? We don't doubt, I don't think that God possesses unlimited strength and power. And we probably don't doubt God's willingness to share it, that power with his children. You know, to flow some of that power our way when needed. I mean, surely the God who gave his only son would also be willing to share a portion of his unlimited power to children who need it. And especially when we're facing serious difficulties or overwhelming challenges. I don't think it's that we doubt God's power or his willingness to share it with his people, but what trips us up is how. The how of applying heavenly power to our earthly problems. It's the more practical question of applying God's power than the theological question of whether or not he has it. And you know, I've discovered there's very little written about the how question on this verse. How do you plug into God's unlimited power source to infuse us with the daily strength we need to face and overcome the various problems and the things we struggle with? Well, I think a big key is found in four words, two phrases: I can and through Christ. Or you want to say, through Christ, I can. That's because experiencing the strength and power of God in your everyday life requires a partnership. There's a part that you must play in overcoming the challenges and adversities of life, and then there's a part that is beyond you that God must play. Now, to explain how this really works, how do you plug into God's power and become infused with his dynamic strength that you need? And to do that, I want to mention a few Bible situations where you can see this principle at work. All right, the first one comes from the Old Testament, when God challenged Moses to lead the Israelites out of slavery. You're all familiar with the story, and he says to Moses, you know, you're my man, I want you to go and do this. And his response was, like many of us, Lord, you got the wrong person. I can't do that. I'm too shy, I don't speak in public, I'm too old, I'm afraid, I just don't have the ability or the strength to do it. Now, this was a very real challenge that he was kind of rejecting. Worst case scenario, if it went really badly, what could happen if Moses answered God's call and went to face Pharaoh and it went terrible? He could die. Probably bigger stakes than most of us face with some of our challenges. He could literally die. So this was a real thing. However, God assured him, Moses, if you'll just go, I'll do the rest. I will enable you to perform miracles. I'll send plagues that'll put the stress on Pharaoh. All you have to do is step out in faith and go. And there you see the partnership that I referred to. God has a part, and Moses has a part. But here's the secret. Moses first has to take that step of faith. Then and only then will God provide the power and the strength to do the rest. Right, here's another example. In Joshua chapter 3, the Israelites have been freed from slavery in Egypt and are finally ready to enter into the promised land. There's only one problem. The border of the promised land is marked by the Jordan River, which just so happens to be at flood stage. Of course, back then there were no boats, no barges, no ferries. God says, no problem. He tells Joshua, organize all the people, get them in a long line, and at the front of the line put the Ark of the Covenant. Y'all remember that from Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? It looked just like that. Put that at the front of the line, make sure everyone is following the Ark, and make a beeline for the promised land on the other side of this raging river. And then God gives the order, march. March right into the raging, churning waters. Now, you've probably seen floods before in your life. Some of you in person, all of us have on TV. And you've seen the power of floodwaters to just rip a house apart or from its foundation, or take a huge semi, 2,000-pound vehicle or truck or whatever, and just wash it downstream. They're very powerful. And so their command is they're standing by the shore here, and it's like, okay, go on. And the water looks like this. Now, if I was like fifth in line or whatever, when Joshua said, head them up and move them out, I think, mate, I found a rock in my sandal right here. I'll just step off to the side. Somebody else, just go ahead. You know, women, children, just take my place. I'm over here, you know, whatever. I mean, that would be terrifying. It just sounded like madness. Walk right in, women, children, everybody, animals, to the torrents of this river. But those were the instructions that God gave. And if they were willing to trust him and just do what he said, God would come through. And amazingly, they did it. I mean, you got to give them credit. As they waded in, the waters began to part. And the people were like, oh my gosh, you know, that was, how close to the edge of disaster do we have to get here, God, you know, before you come through? But God had promised to part the waters, and he delivered. Once the people proved that they believed that he would do it by walking into the current. That's how they proved that they believed. First, take a step of faith, and then God works a miracle. Now, jumping ahead to the New Testament, Luke chapter 9 gives another example. You all know this story. Jesus performed some miracles, healed a bunch of people, and so there's this Jesus mania going on. Huge crowd had gathered, 5,000 people or so. Jesus tells his disciples, you know, these people have been here a really long time. We need to feed them something. To which they responded, we're in the middle of nowhere. And we've worked on it, and we've scrounged up 5 little loaves of bread and 2 measly fish. In other words, this is impossible. We can't do it. Jesus says, I have an idea. If you'll do what I ask you to do, I will do the part that you are unable to do. Their part was to go out and divide the crowds into groups of 50 and then distribute the food. They're probably thinking, this is just ridiculous. We got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish for 5,000 people. Each person's not even going to get a tiny chicken nugget or fish nugget or whatever. I mean, just nothing. This is crazy. But they did it. They divided the people up. They got ready. They go back to Jesus. Okay, we're ready to distribute the food. He performs the miracle. It was a partnership. There was the I can do all things through Christ. You take a step of faith, and then God honors that faith and comes through. One more example of this. Luke chapter 17 tells the story of the 10 lepers. Now, leprosy is a horrible disease. I've been to a leper colony in the Philippines, and it's like cancer, except it attacks and destroys your body from the outside in. And there are 10 lepers, and they see in the distance, because they can't go near the public, they see the miracle-working Jesus coming by, and they cry out, Jesus, have mercy on us. Now, these days, there's still leprosy in the Philippines. Rick has a few people that have leprosy come into his church. We saw them last time I was there. I mean, in modern society, it can be cured now. But they were in a desperate situation. There was no medicine back then. Their only hope of their lives changing was the supernatural power of God to intervene. So Jesus responds when they say, Jesus, have mercy on us. And he says, okay, go show yourselves to the priests. The priest being the one that would verify their healing, pronounce them clean, and allow them back into society. And so these 10 lepers are standing there. They look at their hands, their feet. There's no change. They had not been healed. But Jesus told them to go to the priest to verify their healing. Probably one of them said, well, this is stupid. I'm not walking all the way into the city to have someone tell me that I have leprosy. But then one of them said, hey, maybe what if suppose this is kind of a test? Jesus is waiting to see if we'll have enough faith to believe that he can cause the healing to happen. Maybe it'll happen between here and there. It'll happen along the way. Maybe he says, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm headed over to the priest. This Jesus guy's, look what he's done. I'm going to go. And what does Luke 17:14 say? It says these words, as they went, they were cleansed. As they were walking in the direction that Jesus had told them to walk, they were healed. And I could list many other passages in the Bible that reinforce this kingdom principle. Over and over we see examples of the fact that God is more than willing to intervene supernaturally into the difficulties and challenges of our everyday problems, providing that we are first willing to demonstrate faith in him by walking forward in the direction that he's leading us to go. Now, let me talk about how this works and can work in your life and mine in 2019. Now, I would venture to guess that most all of us here fall into one of two general categories when it comes to how we look at challenges and hardships. There's the I can people and the I can't people. Now, those of us who respond with an I can attitude, maybe it's just reflecting kind of a sense of self-sufficiency. You're a confident person, and you say, yeah, I can do it. Or perhaps you're saying, I can, not under my own strength and power, but through Christ, I can. Now, those who immediately react to the challenges of hardships of life with an I can't attitude, often that just comes from the environment you grew up in, or maybe some tough things that you faced in life. People get stuck in low self-esteem and think, I'm a loser, nothing ever works right for me, I can't achieve the things I want to. But of course, what God wants is that everyone here who usually resides in that I can't category would be able to move over to the I can category. To learn over time how to do that, and to do it consistently enough and stay there long enough to eventually become an I can person permanently. So let's say you have a goal or a dream. Maybe you've always wanted to start your own business. Or maybe you've just dreamed of having great kids, having a great family where everybody loves each other and you're happy and your kids are turning out great. Maybe that's been your dream. Or maybe your dream right now is just to get out of debt or lose weight or achieve a certain thing musically, athletically, reach a certain level in your career. Or maybe find and marry the right person, or invite an unchurched person to church and they find God. Or maybe mend a particular relationship that's been damaged. Or own the car you've always wanted, anything. Taking what we've learned today from Philippians 4:13, what should you do? Well, first you should take the attitude of, I can through Christ. Or if you prefer, through Christ, I can. Not I can do anything because of my own willpower or ingenuity, but I can because God will give me the strength to do it. It's a partnership between you and God. If you do your part that God's not going to come down here and do, God will do the part that you can't do. But you must demonstrate your belief that God will come through by taking the first step. Remember, Moses first traveled to Egypt, then God performed the miracles. He had to go all the way to Egypt in faith, believing that God was going to come through. First, Joshua and the people had to step into the raging river. Then God parted the waters. First, the disciples had to obey Jesus' orders. Then he came through with the food for everyone. First, the lepers had to trust Jesus enough to walk to the temple even though they were still leprous. Then they received their healing. And so it is in your situation. Those goals and dreams are not going to materialize if we just sit there and wait. First, you have to take steps in the direction of your goal and dream. Trust that God will do his part along the way. And the same is true when bad things happen. Good things are goals and dreams and so forth, but when the storms of life sweep into your life, and maybe the big ones that threaten to wipe you out, and you find yourself saying, I can't get through this. not this, or not again, or not now. And I'll bet that when you identified a moment ago the one biggest challenge or issue that's pressing down on you, I bet it's not just like a little sprinkle if you compare it to a storm. Probably not a light rainfall, probably not a thunderstorm, probably not a torrential downpour, but the kind of storm that can leave or maybe has left you, bruised and bleeding. But in your pain and uncertainty, you must take those first steps of faith, trusting that as you do, God will come through for you. God will heal you. God will help you. God will strengthen you. God will provide a way that you don't see right now. Open up a door that you have no idea to imagine right now. But it won't happen without both the I can and the through Christ, or the through Christ I can. So what step of faith, when you think about the issue that you identified earlier, what step of faith might you need to take in that situation to prove to God or to indicate to God, I'm going to go in the direction I believe that you want me to go, and I'm going to believe that you're going to provide, or you're going to change the circumstances, or you're going to make something happen that I'm unable to make happen, but I'm going to start taking steps in that direction. In your situation with the word or the thought you identified, what would it be for you? One of the important things of you being here on a day like today, or any day, is that this is a place that's going to remind you, sort of on God's behalf, we're going to remind you, yes, you can face it. Yes, you can get through it. Yes, you can overcome whatever it is through Christ, who will provide the strength, even if just in the nick of time. Maybe not in the exact way you would have drawn it up or thought it up, but God will be faithful. He will help you through and help you to face and help you to overcome whatever it is. What might be a step of faith that you would take that would get you moving in the direction where then God can honor that faith and make something happen? Hope you'll think about that. Why don't we stand? We'll have our closing prayer. Lord, if we took a poll of everybody in here, we would have some people, life is going really well. There are some concerns. There's a little anxiety here and there, and it's real. And we want to pray, God, that you would help those people. Maybe those of us who life is pretty good right now, or the challenges we still face, to think of what might be the step of faith in the right direction. Lord, for those here who are facing deluge, torrential, huge storms in their life right now, things that just seem to be beyond their ability to deal with. First, God, that you would bring them comfort and strength in the scriptures of knowing that you are faithful. And where there seems no way, you provide a way. First of all, that they would just have the strength to hang on and to trust you. And then, God, to find that step of faith that they could take to move in the direction of healing, or move in the direction of a solution, move in the direction closer to you, and to see you begin to work on that issue, that problem, that challenge, and to see you come through. Lord, I pray that we will all learn the practice, this spiritual discipline, to look at our issues this way, and that we know that you will honor your word. We thank you for the strength and power in this verse and for the opportunity to look at it today. And we pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for coming, everybody. Come up and say hi to Gregory and Nicholas if you get a chance before you take off. Thank them for coming.